to episode 11 of Qatsyr Harvest. This is our review of the upcoming ingathering of God's covenant family. It is scheduled, as we have deduced from all of the clues that God has provided to us, for 7 years before Yahweh's return with his beloved son Dowd in 2033, which is year 6000 Yah, making this Shabuah that will be celebrated with this river of light going from earth to heaven, gleaning the members of his covenant family as we commence the time of Yaakov's troubles on the 22nd of May, 2026. In other words, just 15 months from the time of this recording. And we would love to have you join us. And the best way for that to occur is for you to listen and to learn what Yahweh your God has to say. Now, as a result, we are recommencing where we left off, and it's a good spot for a break as we continue this presentation, because we're about to review what God has told us thus far about Shabuah, so that we again can go about this process of transferring what we learn from our Creator, from our short-term to our long-term memories. The more we hear things, the more we think about them, the more likely it is that we can retain them and own the material. And the more we come to know and understand about Shabuah, the better prepared we are to capitalize upon it. So the festival and the harvest, if you will, of sevens, of 7-7, is an appointment with God. It is to be observed and proclaimed forever. Throughout all time, no matter where we live, it is a prescription for living. It is etched in stone to cut us into God's eternal family. And since Yahweh had so much to say about the Mikra, the invitation to be called out and meet of Shabuah, I want to review his testimony, his instructions, this time less interrupted by my explanations and my commentary, so that you have a better understanding specifically of what God is offering. Then you should take this written communication into account, focusing on the scribed content in this book, so that you can proclaim and explain on your behalf the means to contemplate the consequences of wavering or delaying, and as a result being left behind on the Shabbat and during this week. Well, those of you who have been listening to this program up to this point probably know that it's impossible for me to read anything from the Word of God and not comment on it. And I'm not going to make an exception here. I am going to try to explain this the best I can so that it resonates with you. I am convinced that without the explanation, there are so few that will actually appreciate what God is offering, the nuances of his presentation, that much of it would be squandered. And I know this because this testimony has been available in the Torah, in the heart of the Torah, for 3,400 years. And until this point, no one has understood it. There was no one preparing for a Shabuah harvest. There's no one that knew when it was going to occur. There was no one who could explain any of this to you, because absolutely no one understood it. And that really is the point of what we're doing here. So rather than just read it, I am going to do my best to make it as relevant as possible for you. So we begin with the fact that back in the time of Moshe, there was only one way to be assured that a communication from God would be retained accurately throughout time, and that was to write it down. The Hebrew alphabet was designed specifically for this purpose, comprised of 22 letters, initially all in the shapes of things that pertain to humanity and that we humans use, so that you wouldn't even have to be particularly literate just to and be able to look at the images, the characters themselves, and deduce the meanings of many of these words. When I engaged with YAHOWAH 23 years ago, we began with a very brief discussion that led to 22 years of written communication. I was asked to write what I was learning down, and I did. There are now, I think, 36 books all total that I have composed over these years. Many of them are represented behind me. There are the full set, all available free at YAHOWAH.com. Some are conveniently presented to at goddamnreligion.org. And by writing everything down, what we provided was the ability of readers to do what had never been done before, to experience an amplified translation where the most important aspects of what God was conveying to us were written in bold, followed by a parenthetical where the most general sense of the Hebrew term, separated from the prepositions and conjunctions and with the stems, conjugations, and moods removed if it's a verb, so that you would be able to look up that term as it is transliterated in any online search engine and verify the translations, the authenticity of these translations for yourself. Something that had never been provided previously. And that was a huge advantage of the written text. And another advantage of the written text is I could be held accountable. And not just held accountable, you could go with me on this voyage of discovery. You could read what I knew at that time, 22, 20, 18, 16, 14, 12 years ago, and then see how our base of knowledge grew and the breadth of our understanding multiplied, such that we, in fact, were harvesting conclusions and gleaning insights from the Word of God at a ever escalating pace, such that there were thousands of profoundly important and unique insights that no one had ever perceived before, much less shared. And that as we reached this point, as we near the time of the next harvest, the rate to which we were able to understand what God was conveying grew exponentially. And we came across some of the most profound, in fact, not some of, the most profound discoveries in human history. One of them was so buried under religious rubbish, both by Jews, Christians, and Muslims, that I think it became the greatest discovery ever. And that is that Bar Kokhba, Jesus Christ, and Muhammad are not messiahs. The actual Messiah is David, anointed 3 times by YAHOWAH, symbolic of his 3 lives, and that David is the Son of God. He is our king, and he will return as our king. And most importantly, he volunteered to fulfill Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim in year 4000 Yah, 1,000 years after he wrote the only eyewitness accounts of precisely what was going to happen in 33 CE. He even visited Daniel in Babylon as Gabriel, God's most capable and competent man, and told him exactly when he was going to arrive to the day to fulfill Passover, unyeasted bread and firstborn children, and what would occur as a result, and then walked us through the end of time so that we're in a position to know that Shavuot, which means 7, occurs 7 years before his return. We found so many profoundly important insights along the way. And just a matter of a couple of months ago, Yahweh spoke to me again and said that, thank you. You've done an okay job there, kid. You've written a lot of books. The books are good. But the marginal utility on in another book isn't going to make a lot of difference. It's time you speak to my people. And I'm sharing this with you because God began this by saying, then you should take this written communication into account. I did. We did. And we did for 23 years. And ultimately, by taking it into account and writing those some 36 books, I became the repository of what we had learned. And now we recognize that it was time that we start speaking to his people. And this had always been a bit of anathema to me. I much prefer written communication. It's more precise. It is so exacting that with written communication, if you make a mistake, I think you're duty bound to go back and correct it. And I've been responsible in that way. Every time I have learned something along the way, I've gone back and refined what we have previously said. I liked that. I liked the accountability of it. I like the realization that anybody can access it anywhere in the world. And there's wonderful translation tools that if you aren't like the majority of people who can read and understand English, then you have other options. And it gave you the ability to validate everything that I was saying. And I love words, and the written word is a exceedingly precise and it's a very intelligent medium. I think the greatest invention in human history is written language, far and away. It enables not only those of us who use it effectively to grow in our understanding, but also to pass it on to others. But we've entered a new era where now the spoken word is every bit as enduring as the written word, maybe even more so with electronic medium that's provided by the likes of Facebook and YouTube, X, though it's a bit of a jungle out there, Rumble, which is a bastion of free speech today. They all provide a legacy of whatever we have recorded. And these are all live streams. I'm live streaming right now to 4 YouTube accounts, a Rumble account, an Odyssey account, a Facebook page, and to X. And you'll be able to access any of these things, any of those places, and listen anytime that you want. So the spoken word now has more legitimacy. It has an enduring nature to it. You can hold me accountable. You can hold the one I speak on behalf of accountable. And we both want that. But there is a huge advantage to the spoken word. And if you look at the development of the Torah, this is even acknowledged in the Torah. Bereshith, Genesis, was dictated by Yahweh to Moshe because he was not there during creation or during the flood. He was not there during the narrative with Abraham as the covenant was explained, or with Jacob as the children of Israel were born. He was not there during the episode in Egypt until the very end. And so Yahweh dictated that, and it was all written down, and the first presentation of it was in writing. Then we go through the next books, Shemoth, which means names. We move on there where Yahweh introduces himself to Moshe and to us through him. And we move into the book that I'm sharing from right now, which is Kara. It means to call out, where these prescriptions for living are presented. And in both, what we find is that God is speaking to Moshe, and Moshe is writing these things down as they're being lived out in the lives of God's people. This is very much an experience that is shared between God and those who are benefiting from what he has to say. It was a time of expansive growth in their knowledge and understanding, very much like what Yahweh and I did. We began with a wholly written account as I was trying to explain the great threat of Islam against God's people per his request, and then the great cover-up and counterfeit of Christianity, which there are now 10 volumes explaining both of those journeys. And then into and throughout his Torah and prophets, as we lived this material together and grew together in our understanding. And then you have Numbers, Bamidbar. It is about bitter betrayal. Whether it's the adulterous woman, whether it's the meltdown of Miriam, where she said, you know, we too speak for God. And God said, no, you don't. Whether it's the story of how the red heifer, the Adamah Parah, resolves the problems of the adulterous woman, whether it's the ultimate meltdown at Meribah, which is a horrible place for God's people, the story of the spies and their betrayal of trust. After this tremendous period of growth and insights and working and living together, we experienced a horrible internal rebellion. Significant numbers of even the closest contributors heretofore were lured away by a psychotic, clinically tested psychotic woman. And so I had the exact same experience as the order of the Torah is laid out. And then God says, we're going to do Devarim next. See, Devarim is entirely Moshe speaking to us as he was inspired by Yahweh. And Yahweh turned to spoken communication, knowing that that was by far the most effective way of reaching inside of his people, trying to get their attention, helping them understand, because with the spoken word, there's inflection. And it's not being written in some place, a distance where you can't really see the intensity, the pace, the dedication of the writer. But with the spoken word, particularly with these live video blogs, there's no place to hide. You can see me as I am. This is as real ever gets on the most important subject in the history of humankind. sponsored by Yahweh himself. That's why it is the Yahowah blog. And so we're following the order of the Torah, just as God prescribed it long ago. So then you should take this written communication into account, focusing on the scribed content of the book so that you can proclaim and explain. It's exactly the path that we have taken right up to the Shabuah harvest. It's apparent that the children of Israel never took these words to heart, never processed them mentally, never understood them, never applied them. And therefore, the only reason for writing them down was for us today. Therefore, I look at it just a conversation like this in the Torah and realize it has to be prophetic because there was no reason for God to say it to people who weren't listening to him, who never acted upon these words and didn't even know what they said until this very moment. That means the Torah was written in large part such that I could reintroduce you today to your God's Shem, Yahweh, to your God's Ben, Son, Dod, to the one who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim, so that we could benefit from Shabuah. That is why we're here. God says, and it's on your behalf. And that you should use this as the means to contemplate the consequence of wavering or delaying, and as a result, being left behind. You would be hard-pressed to apply this to the Exodus because of those to whom Yahweh revealed these words and Moshe wrote them down. Only 2 of 600,000 would make it into the promised land, would complete the journey. 2. Yosha, Ben Nun, and Caleb. They were it. And so again, this is prophetic. God wants you to contemplate the consequence of you wavering at this time. If you're a Yehud, a Yisraelite, you and your people before you have gone 3,400 years without acknowledging the name of Yahweh, and 3,000 years without acknowledging the sacrifice of your king, Dod. You don't have any more time. If you continue to waver and delay, you will be left behind. And you don't want to be left behind on Shabuah, because Shabuah is, according to the prophet Yeshayah, who knows what he's talking about, Isaiah, is the beginning of the time of Jacob's troubles. And you think it's bad now, and it really is. The whole world has turned against Israel. The Muslims are up in arms. They smell blood in the water. And Israel now is in favor of an insane plan to relocate 2 million malcontent Muslims who are murderous and who only want one thing, which is to annihilate Jews and eradicate Israel, and move them out of where they can be quarantined and into Egypt and Jordan, where they will be armed to the hilt, where they will metastasize, where there will now be 3 or 4 million jihadists invading Israel as a result of this move, if it were to transpire, as opposed to the 3,000 on 10/7. Suicide Israel. And to make this happen, wait and see. The condition for it to occur will be the two-state dissolution, whereby the heart of the land of Israel is given to these terrorist Muslims, which will start World War III, just as Neville Chamberlain's gift of Czechoslovakia started World War II. You don't want to be there when this happens. It's going to be very difficult to survive as a Jew. The prophet Yoel says it's going to be the most horrendous time in human history, unlike anything that has transpired before, and that would include the Holocaust. You don't want to miss this harvest, which we calculate to be the Shavuah. 7 years, because Shavuah means sevens, and Dotolo so, before his return in year 6000 Yah, which is on October 2nd, 2033. You don't want to be left behind. But even if you are, this legacy will remain online for you to read, to you to listen to, and you will have one more opportunity, that of Towrah, which you're going to have to do some head scratching to figure that one out, because based upon your rabbis, you have replaced Towrah, which means heralds, with Rosh Hashanah, the Babylonian New Year, becoming your high holy day. And you've been hoodwinked into believing that it's Yom Kippur rather than Yom Kippurim, and that it is a day of atonement and of self-sacrifice, of twirling chickens over your head, as opposed to the day of reconciliations. And you're clueless as to who your returning Messiah is. And so you've got a lot to catch up on and learn and unlearn if you're going to prevail after the Shavuot harvest. Fortunately, there will be a pair of witnesses in the last 3.5 years, Yada and Elia. Yada means to know. Elia, Yahweh is God. Left behind on the Shabbat and during this week. Now that is really telling, because the Christian church, the most popular lie in the history of the world, confiscated a single one of the 7 Moed Mikre from the list that God had prescribed, and would rename Shavuot Pentecost. And yet it is a celebration of the Shabbat, and it is fulfilled on a Shabbat, just as it was said here, on the Shabbat. By the way, May 22nd of 2026 is, of course, a Shabbat. The final ingathering on Towrah, it is also a Shabbat. When we have the opportunity to camp out with God following Yom Kippurim on Sukkah, it's also a Shabbat. God does his best work on Shabbats. From the day that you arrive with the sheath of bundled grain gathered and ready for transport, for the uplifting wave offering of the perfected, there will be 7 weeks. You know what this represents. This is Kara, by the way, 23:15. It is on Bakurim that we are to arrive with the sheath of bundled grain ready for transport, because Shavuot represents, or Towrah, Bakurim, excuse me, following Pesach and Matzah, Bakurim represents firstborn children. It was fulfilled by Yahweh's firstborn, his Bakor, Dod. And it's to be symbolized by bringing a sheath of bundled grain gathered and ready for transport and offering it up in a wave offering to God, symbolizing that these are the firstborn children of the covenant, and that they have been perfected. and they have been perfected on matzah. Matzah is the day that Dod's nefesh soul carried the guilt of every covenant member into Sheol to deposit it there, never to be seen again. It is the day that Jews no longer celebrate, so they can't benefit from. That needs to change as well. And the rabbinic calendar, it's a 7-day celebration of Passover, of which matzah is just an ingredient. In Yahweh's calendar, it is Chag Matzah, of which Passover is just the first meal on the first day. It's an amazing difference between the two. It's a matter of life and death. Shamaim, or Sheol. And it says there will be 7 weeks. This means that it's 7 sevens, 49, plus 1 from matzah, or 7 sevens from Bikurim. 7 is important because it is the number of total Moed Mikre. It is important because there are 7 1,000-year eras from the beginning of the time that humankind was cast out of Gan Eden to the time we re-enter the garden on Sukkah and then experience 1,000 years camping out with Yahweh. 7. It represents 6, which is the number of man, created on the 6th day as a carbon-based life form with the atomic number of 6, plus Yahweh, God, who is 1, equals God's idea of the ideal result. 7. And of course, this harvest that we're speaking of is 7 sevens. God's explaining the name. And it occurs 7 years before his return. Meanwhile, into perpetuity and forevermore, the evidence is provided within the enduring testimony. That's a lot to deduce from a single word, ad, but ad and ed and edah are all directly related. Ad and ed are actually spelled the same way. Edah is just the feminization of the term. And it conveys all those things. Meanwhile, into perpetuity, forevermore, testimony, witness, enduring, restoring. If you were doing this translation instead of me, and you wanted to say, I don't like all of those things, I think that we can just pick one of them and that would be easier to read, then you could do your own translation. I don't like to shortchange God. If a word conveys all of those things, I think it's important that we know all of those things. So meanwhile, into perpetuity and forevermore, the evidence is provided within the enduring testimony and restoring witness. To consider the ramifications of hesitating, equivocating, or vacillating during the week and unto the 7 Shabbat. Now, this is actually a very insightful phrase because the week is actually Chag Matzah. And if you were to celebrate Pesach and not follow through with the rest of the week and observe as it was intended and benefit from matzah, then you would be in a horrible place because that's the worst possible outcome. Under those circumstances, your soul would become immortal, and yet it would be stained with religious and political guilt that's not resolved on matzah because you don't celebrate it. And so rather than becoming firstborn children, you would be dispatched forever into Sheol. That's not a very good outcome. So it's really important to stay through the process. The other relates to the rebellion that I mentioned. That to be part of God's family, you can't get part of the way there. You can't even have done a wonderful job up to a point and then decide to rebel and go a different direction. You either see it through or you're not deemed as loyal, and God does not do well with disloyal people. So you need to see it through. No equivocating, no vacillating. The path is straightforward. God is straightforward. He's dependable. He's reliable. He tells you what we ought to do, and it is our responsibility, if we want to be with him, to do it. And of course, the 7 weeks speaks of what we're doing. And we're supposed to do this until the 7th Shabat. Again, pretty hard for this to be the day that commemorates the birth of a Christian church, which gathers on a Sunday, if it is a celebration of the Shabat. But why would you let a detail get in the way of a religion? You can explain the written accounting of 50 days, 7 sevens plus 1. Now, we know precisely that during the week applied to Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim, because it is just the 49 days from the wave offering of Bakurim, and now he has said this is 50 days, and by saying so, the only rational deduction from these juxtaposed statements is that the week that we ought not vacillate, equivocate, or hesitate on is the week of Chag Matzah, validating my interpretation of these words to you, which is why I'm sharing these insights with you as opposed to simply reading the text. So you can explain the written accounting of 50 days. So therefore, with the renewing and restoring gift of the sacrificial offering, you can approach and present yourself to Yahowah. The sacrificial offering that would pertain to the difference between 7 sevens, 49 days, and 50 days would be what occurred on Matzah. That is the day that takes 49 to 50. And while it's the day prior to that, Pesach, that provides eternal life, the ultimate gift was the sacrificial offering that allows us to approach and present ourselves to Yahowah, that is restorative. And that is because on Matzah, Dod took our guilt, took it into Sheol, dropped it off there. It's akin to a black hole, never to escape, never to be seen again, which renews us, restores us, perfects us, so that we're in a position to approach Yahowah. That's the purpose of that sacrifice. Torah 23:16. You should come bringing out of your homes 2 loaves of life-altering bread. And we don't typically think of bread as being life-altering. We don't typically even bother to think of what do the 2 loaves represent. Why bring them out of our homes? Why isn't the matzah prescribed this time? These are lakem. This is leavened bread. Doesn't mention leaven, but loaves of bread would most often be leavened. Yeah. As we've talked before, Yahowah has 3 horticultural metaphors that explain the nature of Pesach, matzah, Bakurim, Shabuah, Towrah. And these ingredients are grapes, which, when crushed and properly prepared, create wine, which is Pesach. The blood of the Pesach El, Dod as the Zeroah, is put on the doorway to life. Symbolic of that. Grain is the second thing, when properly prepared, turns into the bread of life. Grain is that which is presented purely without yeast on matzah. The yeast, that fungus of yeast, is removed, carried into Sheol. And it represents barley, which is a grain that is purified and harvested and made part of that wave offering on Bakurim. And it when we reach Shabuah, it is a harvest of standing wheat, standing up strong, mature, ready to be harvested. And the third ingredient, the third item that when properly prepared, crushed, serves our understanding are olives. Towrah is an olive harvest. And olives become olive oil, which is an ultimate form of enlightenment throughout time, and also the means to anoint souls. And could even apply then to Yom Kippurim, where the one anointed by Yahweh on 3 occasions with olive oil, and even we are told that Yahweh used his own special anointing olive oil, foretold even a 4th time. And it is Dode who is returning, our Messiah. So all of these things exist, and you can even apply them to Sukkah, because we're returning to the garden, and these are horticultural metaphors, where there will be fields of wheat, where there will be fields of barley, where there will be vineyards of grapes, where there will be wine, and there will be bread, and there will be orchards of olives and olive oil and lamps like the menorah that is now over my left shoulder. I forgot to put it in the scene and talked about it considerably in our last 2 programs. That's why I'm an amateur producer of this program. I need my wife to return from Florida, where she's currently going to be there through the evening tomorrow. So you should bring out of your homes 2 life-altering loaves of bread, Lakem, as an ascending wave offering, a double portion for a 10-fold enrichment and empowerment. So much symbolism from here. This now, because Yahweh is speaking to the children of Israel, it is out of the children of Israel that these loaves are being brought out. I had as part of this rebellion where the rebellion said we didn't even know that Shabuah was our harvest until recently, them distinguishing it from Towrah, which is a olive harvest of Israelites, making them Goyim, and they're thinking that Shabuah is theirs, just like Christians stole it as well. Well, this pretty much precludes that, doesn't it? The loaves of bread come out of the house of Israel. Now, because we're told that the attendees of Shabuah are varied, young and old, rich and poor, men and women, various stations of life, that there is a potential inference that this wheat harvest and its varieties of wheat's plural, would represent Goyim and Israelites. But many times when Yahweh uses 2 in reference to his people, it is as he uses it in Yirmiyah 31 when he is talking about the restoration of the covenant. He makes it very clear the restoration of the covenant is not with Goyim. It's not with Goyim and Israel. It's with Yehudah and Israel. And so there is every reason to conclude that is also the case. Now, that doesn't necessarily exclude Goyim from participating in the harvest, because when we are incorporated into Israel, when we come into the house of Israel, when we journey out of that house with Israel to the promised land, as is being presented here, then we can partake of that which was offered by Yahweh to Israel, which is the Torah, its covenant, these Mikra instructions, and therefore these harvests. But it's reinforcing that it is by recognizing that we're coming out of the house of Israel that this is possible. The bread of life is an ascending wave offering. It's just, again, like Bikurim, because Shabuah is a Bikurim harvest, being offered up, symbolically saying that these individuals are on their way to Shamayim. And we're told that it is a double portion because the Shabuah harvest is larger than the Bikurim harvest. Now, in Bikurim, there's only one person harvested that we know of. Is there the possibility post-Bikurim that Abraham and Sarah, Jacob, and Yishak, Samuel, others that were extraordinary, my buddy Yeshaya, Yirmiah, Hosea, Yoel, so many wonderful individuals, of course, Moshe, could have been gathered in, or they could have gone directly to Shamayim previously. We don't need to know. We aren't told explicitly, but we know that Bikurim was fulfilled by a single individual, David, the son of the Father. So a double portion could mean that Shabuah is fulfilled by two individuals. Since it is a Bikurim harvest, it would be David and the final Zeroah, Yada, who is working with Dod. If it is just a double portion and we're expecting twice as many participants, then I guess I could be whispering this in pillow talk to my wife, and it would just be the two of us. I don't think that's what God is inferring. I think the double portion here means that this is going to be a much more robust harvest. I think it is more exponential, and I think this is the largest of the three harvests. So I think that is the intent of the double portion. Shamayim, though Shanaim could also mean that it is a secondary harvest too. And that would be a very accurate reflection of what this is, because Bikurim is the first harvest and Shabuah is the secondary harvest. And there is a third option, which is even better than the first two that I have shared with you. And, I'm not the least bit uncomfortable, and I hope you're not, recognizing that the likelihood is all three of the things I'm going to share with you are true. And for me to walk you through openly and honestly with the most reasoned deductions that can be made and conclusions that can be advanced from the text, and thinking it through with you, is much healthier than me being almost authoritative and dictatorial and say, this means this, and if you don't believe it, then you're going to hell. That isn't Yahowah's style. He wants us to think these things through. He wants us to teach others how to think them through. It's important that you know my thought process. I've shared with you how I came to the dates, for example, of Shabuah, and I want you to know how I can go about interpreting this so that you can consider the implications. That third implication of a double portion is explained by Ishiron. You see, Ishiron, which is a tenfold enrichment and empowerment, also occurs at Bikurim. Yahowah's firstborn children at Bikurim, as a result of Pesach and Matzah, receive a tenfold enrichment and empowerment, so that we are enabled, we are enlightened, we are emancipated, we are more like God. We're far more capable as a result of benefiting from these things. And then comes Shabuah, because the process is to take us from this mortal physical world of chaos and decay to a energized and perfect environment, dimensions beyond where we currently are. We really have to be enriched and empowered all over again, And so this is the second time to receive a tenfold enrichment and empowerment. That's the most likely. Although I think many of the things that I've shared with you are valid. They should be comprised of, and this is now the loaves of bread that he's talking about that have been brought out of the homes of Israel, of fine flour, baked with chametz, with yeast, for firstborn children, Bikurim, to approach Yahweh. Now, if you are a beneficiary of matzah, then all of the yeast has been removed from your soul. And this then is symbolic of the fact that what we're offering up to God is those who may still be yeasted for a while, but ultimately, because they know that they're a beneficiary of Bikurim, will have that yeast removed. But it is this acknowledgement that during Shabuah, we are asked to convey this message to everyone. So the overwhelming preponderance of those listening to me now are still yeasted, and I am offering you up to God. And it is by you then recognizing the benefit of what occurred on matzah that your fungus of religious and political guilt is removed. So this is all done to approach Yahweh. And you hear Yahweh's name over and over again. Yahweh's name is very easily pronounced. He told us it was based on Haya, the verb I am, I was, I will be. Haya explains how to pronounce 3 of the 4 letters in Yahweh's name, the Yod and the Hes. No mystery. Yah-Wah in terms of those letters. So all that remains is how to pronounce the Wah, which I'm offering the O sound because it's a vowel. And that shouldn't be difficult because the book that we're reading from, the book that introduced us to Yahweh's name, the book that told us how to pronounce Yahweh's name, the book that told us that Yahweh was God's one and only name, is written with a Wah in the middle of it. The Wah is what creates the O sound in Torah. Nobody disputes that the Wah in Torah is pronounced as an O. And it even has the Ah at the end of it. So Yahweh is the obvious answer. Should you say, well, that's just one word? Well, how about the single most repeated word in the Hebrew language over the last 3,000 years, shalom? Where do you think the O sound comes from in shalom? Yes, the Wah. You should come as close as possible, taking responsibility above and beyond the loaves of bread. Speaking against to the children of Israel, asking them to come close. They have all of these years scattered and gone away. The mission now is for you to approach God. Come as close as possible. Take responsibility above and beyond these loaves of bread, attacking the problem by dining with 7, conveying the promise of being perfected, becoming unblemished and innocent as children by way of the lambs. Each year is the means to renewal. And one bull. One bull, representing that which is frustrating and divisive, broken, ineffectual, but also productive and fruitful. It is an Adamah Parah, which is a man of the earth who is productive and fruitful. that will perform this same function for Yisrael on Towrah in 2033. And it's the single bull that makes a tremendous difference here as well, because he is the one Yahweh has chosen to kick some sense into his wayward children and to stamp out all of the demonic nonsense that is swirling among them. Representing that which is frustrating and divisive, broken, ineffectual, fruitful, and productive. A male in the morning to encourage being perceptive and discerning, considering the available information to respond appropriately. And 2 transformative rams, representing the upright pillar in the doorway, even the leader of the flock. Though David served as the Pesach El. El is the term here. He not only provides the doorway to life, he is the leader of the flock. And it's his blood that was smeared on the upright pillar, forming the doorway to God's home. They will exist as a means to become acceptable and to ascend to Yahweh. Their gift is offered freely to you and is poured out by them by the feminine manifestation of the fiery light, Isha. Ish is fire. Isha is fire, but with a feminine aspect to it. Only so much we can make about masculine versus feminine endings, but that is the most correct rendering of the word would be fiery light, and fiery light, knowing that in this case there is the feminine ending, most likely conveys the fact that when Yahweh conveyed his nature to his people, he used Ish, fire. That's Yahweh's a spiritual being. The closest thing that we know that's equivalent to spiritual energy is fire, because you see, fire transforms that which is decaying and physical into that which is illuminating and energy-based light, just as we on Shabuah are enriched and empowered a second time, done so also exponentially. This is the concept of what the light provides. And we become a uniquely welcoming and pleasing spirit of acceptance, reconciling the relationship to approach Yahweh. Fire also purges guilt, so that any fungus that was remaining in those loaves of bread is incinerated at this time. This is very much like what Yahweh is going to do with his people when he, this final remnant of his people on Towrah, who didn't make the Towrah harvest, the end gathering, the previous night, so that they're pleasing and acceptable, so that they can welcome Yahweh back into their presence. They must too be purged by both water and light, which is the entire purpose of the sacrifice of the Adam of Parah. You should prepare and provide just one, a singular satar, or a scapegoat to depict demon-possessed beings to be overcome to prevail, and also representing Elia, who was the man who was most identified with the wearing the furry coat of a goat. And it is Yahweh who is the most outspoken critic of Israel's propensity to be religious and political. And that is why he's coming back, as no one spoke more powerfully against the religions and politics of Israel than did Elia. And that's something to think about, Israel, particularly since so many of you are political and religious, that the very prophet that you are expecting to return was God's most outspoken critic, damning religion and politics. There's only one reason he would ask him to come back at this time. And that the scapegoat is for going astray, for having missed the way, for having been wrong. And the two lambs, the sons a year old for renewal each year, serving as a sacrificial offering for consumption during the feast to reconcile the relationship, completely finishing what was required to pay the debt and to make amends, reestablishing rapport. Torah 23:19. Now, in this particular case, and in every case of the sacrifices, what we find is that they are consumed by the attendees. Yahweh is not asking you to give him a bull or a goat or a lamb or a ram. These are festival feasts. They're chogs. And as a festival feast, we dine together. And it's interesting that the human mind functions best on protein. And so we're able not only to think more adroitly, supplied with protein, which Yahweh needs us to do, but the very fire that prepares this meal provides warmth. It makes the meal safer for us to consume, and it enlightens all of those around. So there's a lot going into this particular metaphor, and we're told that it makes it possible for those who have missed the way and have been wrong up to this point to have their relationship reconciled with God, reestablishing rapport. And so then the priest should evaluate and waive the bread of firstborn children. So again, we're reminded Shabuah is only possible because of firstborn children. It isn't a separate ingathering all to itself. It is based entirely on what Yahweh and David accomplished on Pesach, Matzah, and Bakorim, which makes Shabuah possible. So then the priest should elevate the wave offering of bread of firstborn children along with them as an uplifting wave offering before the presence of Yahweh. Along with the two lambs, they will be set apart and purifying to approach Yahweh in conjunction with the Cohen. Now, there isn't anybody within Israel today that would know if they are a descendant of the Lowy and therefore Cohen or not. And I'm not sure it even matters in the short term, because when Dod, who's the one who really matters, brought the Ark of the Covenant back into Jerusalem, he chose men who were from Edom, Obed-Edom, to perform as Yahweh had instructed regarding the Ark of the Covenant. And so it is wholly appropriate for Yahweh and Dod to have selected the man Yashayah identifies as the man from Edom to serve in this role for you at this time. He's going to officiate the Shabuah harvest. And you should announce an invitation to meet along with a welcoming opportunity to announce what you read in association with this essential day. So Shabuah is essential. We spent an entire program on what that means. And we considered all of the elements that would help us better appreciate the true nature of essential. And so it is essential for many reasons. And one is to make certain that upon the homecoming and family reunion, where Yahweh and Dod return on Yom Kippurim, that there is a welcoming audience there. And so, however many more join as a result of the ingathering of Towrah, or the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah, and are there as a mortal remnant, all to the good. But at this point, it's a lay down hand. Yahweh has prevailed. We have prevailed. It exists as a set apart Kodesh. Kodesh means that it is uncommon. That means that very few people relatively are going to partake in it. You are never going to see, in association with the Yahweh blog or these Facebook or YouTube pages and channels, the X presence, an enormous audience. We are only going to appeal to about 1/3 of Israelites and about 1 in a million Goyim. That is the target audience. And we're not here to elicit big numbers. We're here to convey a big message. What you choose to do with it is up to you. Delivering it to you is up to us. We're going to do our job. I hope you do yours. So set apart means that it is unique, it is uncommon, it cannot therefore be religious or political, because those things are very common. They are the most common things amongst men and women. So it exists as set apart, special, not ordinary. And it is a mikra. Therefore, it is one of the 7 mikra, invitations to be called out and meet with God, to proclaim the word, to read and recite, for you to approach. You should not endeavor to perform or accomplish any of the work, service, or duties of the Malaka, the spiritual counselor, and the heavenly messenger. Malaka is how we ended the last program. I said some things that were perhaps controversial for some of you. I have since found that everyone who is part of the covenant family and listening to these shows understood exactly what Yahweh was saying through this process. But when we look at Malaka, the very first thing that should come into our mind, and something I hinted at but didn't convey in our last program, is that we are told in the book entitled Malachi, which means my messenger, my heavenly messenger, my spiritual envoy. We're told in the last chapter that Eliah will be one of the 2 witnesses. So wouldn't it be appropriate for Yahweh to use the same term to identify the other witness? It is out of the book of Malachi, and Malakah is based on exactly the same word, malak, spiritual messenger and heavenly representative. And in this case, it is where Malachi is my spiritual messenger, my heavenly envoy. Malakah puts the feminine AH ending to malak. And we talked about that for a number of reasons. One is the head and heart that we learned from Yahweh analyzing the difference between Adam and Chawah in the garden. And if you notice, Chawah had been the chatty one. Her actual name means to speak out, to express. And so her name means to speak out, and Yahweh said she would be coming from the heart. And we recognize that's the difference between the written word that has preceded this and the spoken word, which is now what we are conveying to you. And so there's also a message there, isn't there, about this transition to the more feminine approach of conveying these words audibly to pierce the heart of Yisrael. And in all of human history, according to Yahweh, there's only one person who's been the beneficiary of his 7 ruach. Ruach being a feminine term. Ruach being Yahweh's spiritual messengers, his heavenly envoys. And so it is entirely appropriate for him to use the feminine to identify the one person who has benefited from his 7 ruach. We learned that in Yeshayah 11, of course. This is an eternal prescription for living. Means what I've just shared with you is everlasting, and it is a prescription if you want to live. It is a clearly communicated and inscribed decree to be cut into the relationship and to live life to its fullest, chukah. In all of your dwelling places and homes for all time, throughout your generations forevermore, including going on and being part of the Sukkah celebration where we get to camp out with God here on earth in Eden-like conditions for 1,000 years. That's a lot to absorb, isn't it? It's a lot to process. Almost all of it contrary to what the religious have been told, what people have come to believe. Radically different than the interpretations of this text that I don't think ever actually been interpreted. They've been available to read, but no one has understood them heretofore. This is the Shabuah harvest. This is how we prepare ourselves for it. This is what God is offering and through whom he is making it possible. And this is his proclamation of its influence on us forevermore. I think this is a good place for us to conclude this, the 11th episode of Harvest. We will commence from where we left off in episode 12, which I suspect will be tomorrow. I'm spending most of my time writing the commentary on Devarim, Deuteronomy 7, which has been an exceedingly informative presentation by Moshe speaking on behalf of Yahweh as to what God expects from us when we are confronted by those who are misrepresenting him. And I will share those insights with you as I complete them over the next few days. So I very much thank you for listening to this presentation of Qatsyr Harvest, this being episode 11. I appreciate you inviting us into your home and for listening to what your God wants you to know. This has been the YAHOWAH blog, and I'm your host, Craig Winn.